Hi, everyone. It's Vince Molinaro from Leadership Contract Inc. And welcome to this episode of the Lead the Future podcast. My guest today is Frank Stramaglia, who is a dynamic leader known for his deep commitment to Canadian patients and healthcare professionals. And he has more than 20 years experience in the pharmaceutical industry, and he's currently the general manager of Astellas Pharma Canada, and he leads the Canadian business operations of this Japanese pharmaceutical company. And he joined Astellas back in 2007 as a product manager, and since has served in areas including market access, sales, and marketing. And in 2016, he was named the commercial director of the year. Today, he leverages his energy, enthusiasm, and expertise to develop and support a growing, highly motivated team at the company. Together, Frank and his team are working to improve the quality of healthcare and outcomes for Canadian patients. And he also currently serves as director of the Innovative Medicines Canada. And prior to joining to Astellas, Frank worked at several pharmaceutical companies, including Bayer and Roche, in increasingly senior roles. So welcome, Frank, to the Lead the Future podcast. It's great to have you. I appreciate you making time.
Thank you, Vince. It's an honor to be with you today.
So tell me, kind of what right now do you see are the big challenges and opportunities, facing the company?
Yeah, we're at a pretty interesting time in the company's history. Over the last few years, through COVID, given our pipeline, we've restructured the organization. We've downsized a few times, preparing for this moment. And this moment that we're in is scaling up for the future. But it's a challenge. It's a good challenge to have, but it's a challenge. We're trying to launch several assets in the next 18 months, all while trying to build up our organization as well as managing the change that's coming from above the affiliate. We're trying to grow and mature as an organization globally, as well as addressing the dynamic change in the marketplace. So that's currently the challenge that's on us right now.
And what have you learned about kind of what are the implications of all of this to, your leaders? Let's talk about that first, and then ultimately your broader team members.
Yeah, I think getting people to get out of their comfort zone is the biggest learning. When you're going through a period like this, we always default back to what I did before and my experiences. And you have to remind people that while those things can help you, it's also very important to recognize that, the environment we're in is a unique environment. It's one that none of us have dealt with before, and therefore we've got to, really be thinking differently about how we approach business challenges. The other, I think, learning is in times like this, we can tend to look down more than we look up.
Hmm.
It's something that you've helped us work with over the years. And in order to be successful, we've got to find time to look up and look into the future, anticipate what's coming, and plan for that, as well as execute on the near-term objectives that we have.
Yeah. So how did you balance that tension, as this, as the most senior leader running running the company here? How did you balance that tension of the changes you needed to make structurally, and then also kind of positioning and building the team for the future? Because as you said, the future is pretty compelling,
Mhm.
but it'll be awesome and challenging in executing on those priorities.
Yeah. So, we when you embark on something like this, you've got to have the right strategy in place, right? What do we need to do to execute on the goals and where we're headed? You need to have the right plans in place, obviously, and then most importantly, we need to have the right people focus, the right people in place, and you have to be able to make time for your leaders to have those discussions and think about people. And it isn't just about talent hiring. Employee retention. Those are all important things. It's about making sure that when people are in seats, when they're working, that they're working in a collective way and that they're highly engaged and connected to your purpose. So I think that's one of the challenges. We often default to the other things first, right? The plan, the strategy, and do we make time for the conversations we need to have on the people side, and making sure that we've got that engagement culture intact to set us up for success.
Yeah. And so as you were thinking about this evolution that you needed to make, because part of that shift is also a shift in your business model, right? Moving to more specialty markets and therapeutic areas and whatnot. And that's not an insignificant shift. So what was going through your mind about what you needed to do to kind of help your organization kind of make that leap?
Yeah, well, what was going through my mind is first and foremost acknowledging that this was a significant transformation for the organization. It wasn't a slight shift, it was a significant transformation, and therefore it required us to take significant steps, dramatic action. And that started with, pulling the leadership team off site for a few days and giving them the opportunity to look in the future and ask that question, right? First and foremost, do they think we need dramatic change in order to be successful with the path forward for the organization to transform from a more traditional pharma company to one that is highly specialized in cutting edge therapies and diverse therapeutic areas, as well as with precision medicine. Making sure I'm bringing the executive team along with that question. So that was, I think, the most critical step, is people understanding, hey, yeah, we've been successful. We've had a highly rewarded and recognized corporate culture. But in order for us to be successful moving forward, we can't rely on how we've operated to date. We've got to change and evolve.
Yeah. And what was your experience as you worked with your executive team to kind of help them make that shift? And really, it sounds like you're getting them aligned um, to a common vision of what's required, right? And that degree of change that will be needed.
Yeah. Um, Interesting dynamic, maybe not unexpected, right? Some of the people that have been around at the company a long time wanted to hold on to the history, the legacy, and the way we did things. But thankfully, some of the new, fresh minds on the team helped us see that there are other ways that we should be,
Yeah.
and there are things we should be considering moving forward. And with that, I think diversity of thinking on the team, with the right amount of time, the right facilitation and partner to work through that conversation, I think we were very successful in getting to a collective agreement that,
Yeah.
yeah, we needed to make a significant change, and we needed to start thinking about and envisioning what culture and we needed for this organization to be successful long term.
So then you've got your team kind of everyone's on the same page.
Mm,
You've got this balance of kind of honoring the past,
mm.
but bringing new ideas for the future. And then what were kind of the next steps along this transformation journey?
Yeah, in reflection now, Vince, going back to that, I think the best thing we did, again with some support from our expert partner, is pushing this down. Once you get the executive team on board to say, yeah, this is what we need for our organization, getting it out of the hands of the executive team, into the hands of not just people leaders, we need them engaged as well, but individual contributors, was the most important, and I think the critical success factor for us. So we didn't take anything and push it down the organization. We took some thinking, and brought it to different layers of the organization and asked those individuals, whether you were a leader or an individual contributor, to say, all right, what do you think we need to do? What do you envision are the core elements of our corporate culture that we need to either sustain or create moving forward if we're going to be successful? So
Yeah.
I think that was a critical step. Having said that, though, there's no way we would have been able to do that if we didn't start from step one like we did with the executive team, is getting the full team to
Yeah.
really understand the need for change.
So how do you kind of engage your leaders and your team through it? What were some of the assets or tools or strategies that you
Yeah.
use to help you do that?
I think one of the most powerful tools we used, for us, was the era exercise, we called it, where we broke the history of the organization down into three separate eras. We ran a workshop where employees could explore these different areas. They could understand the milestones, the things that happened, the setbacks, the successes, And that was done with people who had been here through those eras, so they had the direct experience. And obviously, there's people who were with the organization who had no context that even occurred before them. And it was
Yeah.
remarkable the connection that people made to the organization when they
Yeah.
understood the history further. And then that led to a call to action with a blank slate of Era 4, which says, all right, now it's up to all of us to define the next phase of our history of an organization. And what that
Yeah.
did, I think, was connected people to the purpose of the
Right.
organization and made people feel more accountable that
Yeah.
they had a role to play now in shaping the next era for Astellas Canada.
Yeah, that's always interesting because two things there that what you and your team did, and certainly the in and we've done this with other organizations and creating those era posters. As I said earlier, sometimes when you're leading change, there's a tendency with some leaders that we just got to focus on the future, but we have found you have to honor the past, right?
Mhm.
And to your point, it's not only honoring the past for people who've been part of that past, new people appreciate the history. And then the second element of that, as you just described, is what's your place in the history of the company? And I think, every day when we're showing up to work, I don't know if we're really thinking about our roles in this way, right? Like we actually do have a place and time in the history of a company, and we are here to work together to you know shape the future for future employees and future managers and leaders. So I don't know if that's an insight that you've learned through it, but certainly in working with you, we kind of saw that as we were observing you and your team put all these things into action.
Yeah, it almost for the people that were been there, they came out of that exercise going, "Wow, I almost forgot some of that, and I feel so
Yeah.
proud that I was part of it." And for the new people in the organization who weren't, the overwhelming feeling from those individuals was, "Wow, I'm a part of this organization." And when they say
Yeah.
this organization, it's the context of all of the great things that happened before
Yeah.
and their belief and confidence that they're going to be part of something great with Era 4.
Yeah. What I thought also thought was was interesting was as you look at that history, there was sort of this sense of like what was kind of your DNA as a company and that ability to uh, you know, execute flawlessly on things, um, pivot quickly, drive change,
Mhm,
was also, I think, important for people to realize we already have what we need kind of for the future in
mhm.
some ways.
Yeah, there was this inherent, as you said, like capabilities that we had there that we almost, didn't appreciate
Yeah,
through that exercise that we could lean on to help us kind of map out the future.
yeah. So now, as you looked to the future, and typically, then, as you said earlier, the expectations um, shifts, not just of your leaders and managers, but everybody. What was becoming clear to you, and sort of how did you define that new set of expectations?
Yeah, what was becoming clear is that we had through those steps had incredible momentum. So we needed to capitalize on the momentum, but we needed to quickly get people to in a more deep way understand the reasons for change, right? Which is what is it going to take for us to be successful in mapping out and creating. Shaping Era 4, if you will. So the people leaders got involved with those steps, really, running a series of workshops with their teams to understand the market dynamics, and more importantly, to bring it back to, well, what does that mean for me for a different function or a specific team? So
Yeah,
it really brought it closer to the individual. Again, making them feel like, yeah, I have a role to play in this. This isn't an executive responsibility. I know how my role impacts shaping the future. So that was, I think, a really critical step. I think the other thing we learned in that was you can't rush those steps.
right.
So there were times where we had to take a step back, maybe give a bit more time for people leaders, and they provided feedback to us, and that really allowed us to make some adjustments and allocate more time when needed.
Yeah. And how did you end up then really kind of crystallizing the expectations for everyone, so that people started to embrace
Mhm.
that and step up in new ways.
Yeah, so once we got people understanding kind of the reason for change, and then the three important pillars that emerged that they clearly felt that they were the ones making the decisions on, right? They decided on what our three core pillars of our culture were going to be, which was ambition, competitiveness, and accountability. At that point, once we got here, then it became very clear people were almost super eager and lacking patience. They wanted to know, all right, I'm here. Tell me what this looks like. Tell me what's the mindset I need to be ambitious? And, what does it look like when you talk about ambitious behaviors? Because those words can mean things to different people. So we needed to get it more in focus. And that was kind of the final step. And again, that step I think took us time. There were
Yeah,
a few steps we took where we didn't quite get it right, but we knew it was so important to get that level of focus and clarity for the organization that we needed to take the time to get it right. So I think at the end, to get it over the finish line, we went back to a group of culture champions. These are people from all over the organization, leaders, individual contributors from sales, medical affairs, and we tasked them with taking all the input that we had from their colleagues and getting it
yeah.
to a final draft. And we said, listen, this is going to evolve over time. We'll come back to it. And they created some assets that we were able to roll out to help employees get a better understanding of now what we expect from them behavior wise.
Yeah. In a very subtle way, there's something, really interesting here that I'm really curious about is for you, um, how did you balance that? I'm assuming internal tension between the need to speed, for speed, and the
Mhm.
patience to go. We need to go at this in a way that really people can embrace it, understanding. How did you personally deal with that tension between pace, speed, and then adoption and understanding?
Yeah, it wasn't easy as, we obviously and, people like me, we want things to happen instantaneously. We know
Right.
what we need to do and we want it to all fall into place. Um, but part of the I think the benefit in the journey is, what you learn and what you experience along the way. Um, so you can't rush too much because then you miss out on some of those things that you learn and the experiences that you as a leader go through, but then also your people go
Yeah.
through. One step
Cool.
that took a long time was a recognition that for me, I wanted to be as close to the organization as I possibly could be through this transition, and decided that I should do a road show where I dedicated. It took me a lot longer than I thought, but it worked out to be just over 3 months to meet one on one with every employee in the organization to get their thoughts on what they thought was the strength of our organization, what were the areas for improvement, and to really drill down and understand what they needed from their leader, from the leadership team, and from myself in order to be more connected to the organization and more engaged as an employee long term to work at Astellas Canada.
Yeah, and I can imagine that that had a huge impact because, people know how busy you are, obviously, given your role, and you're making that commitment to go out and meet people and kind of talk to them eye to eye. And I'm
Mhm.
sure that was a pivotal moment for you and for the team. Did you find as you did that, you came away feeling inspired, or did it become more of a reality of how much work there was ahead? What did you find was the value of doing that roadshow?
I've never, Vince, been more inspired and fired up as a leader
Yeah,
than I was coming out of that exercise.
yeah,
Um, Not that I took for granted the people, but I was really impressed with people. I was impressed with how they came prepared. I was impressed with how transparent they were about what they shared with me, and I was overwhelmed by the amount of trust that people put in me to share that type of information. But you're right. I quickly kind of came out of that going, I can't let this organization down. I have to now act on the feedback. And more importantly, I have to report back on the feedback. I think sometimes we miss that step. right? We take
Yeah,
action, and we aren't as deliberate and thoughtful about reporting back, because there's some things you can act on and there's some things you can't. And sometimes it's equally important to report back on, I heard this, for these reasons I can't take the steps you may expect of me, but this is what we're going to do to try and address your concerns and make the environment better.
yeah. That's awesome. So what kind of impact have you been seeing? I mean, the journey is continuing, of course, but what has been some of the impact you've seen either in how your leaders have been stepping up, or how the broader team has been, kind of showing up day to day?
Yeah. The momentum was marvelous. I think as soon as we got people to that stage where they understood, they wanted to be part of it. And even before we had the in focus behaviors and mindset for each one of the pillars, I already started to see people, behaving in a way that was aligned to this journey. It was rare that I'd be in a meeting where I didn't hear somebody use one of those three words, if not all of them,
Interesting.
at some point. And so the momentum started quite early, and I think that you also start to see some champions emerge throughout that. Just some people that are there much quicker,
Yeah,
leveraging them to also motivate and bring their peers along was tremendous.
yeah,
Um, so outside of the momentum, what tangible results did we see? Well, we rolled this out in October of 2022. That's when we really started to get people's, their hearts and minds engaged in shaping this for us. We did a global engagement survey, an Astellas internal survey to track employee engagement. That was done in September. So that gave us a baseline measure. And our score was just over 60 and well below the company average at that time. Uh, Fast forward to July 2023, we've just done a pulse survey to get an update on where we are, and we've jumped to 81% and 8 points above our last survey and 11 percentage points above the entire organization. More importantly, outside of that, employee engagement is what drives performance. And last year, we were able to grow our business by 15%. That was the second highest growth out of the top 10 affiliates within Astellas Global.
that's amazing. That is unbelievable to see that kind of shift. So congrats to you and your team. I think what it also says is how quickly change can happen, right? And be curious in terms of, you're in there. Is that what you kind of witness, right? Is that this, those are not insignificant
Yeah.
leaps in engagement scores.
Yeah, that's one of the things I took away from this, Vince, and I've been sharing with some of my colleagues in other countries. Don't underestimate how fast you can shift
Yeah,
culture
yeah,
in employee engagement
yeah.
with dedicated focus and effort. You can move the needle quite quickly.
Yeah, that's awesome. So as we're beginning to kind of wind down the discussion, what's your advice to other senior executives that are kind of needing to embark on a leadership culture change initiative to
Mhm.
support a new strategy? What would be the top, two or three things for them to think about?
Yeah, I would say that connect people to the purpose, help them really understand the why behind the reason for change, and don't rush that step. As we
Hmm,
said, I think that's a really important, critical step. The other thing that we learned along the way that I thought was essential is make this a bottom up approach, not a top down initiative. One simple thing is don't call it a project, call it a journey, because there was some skepticism early on in this journey, that people just thought this was another project that was shiny, that we would focus on, and that it would basically fade into the sunset after a year. So we really had to make sure that we said, hey, this is going to be who we are, and what we do, how we behave for a really long time. So this isn't a project, and this is something we're going to be committed to. And then following on that, I think another critical success factor was making sure that every communication going out to the organization, whether that's verbal in person or an email, that in some way, shape, or form it's connected back to the core pillars of the culture that you're trying to stimulate.
Yeah. So clearly, what you're talking about, there is a real discipline to this work,
Hmm.
and you're kind of just constantly maintaining
Hmm.
that that drumbeat on the discipline required to make the changes. So,
Yeah.
well, Frank, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your story and your culture journey, because it is remarkable. The impact you've been generating is phenomenal, and it's been great, working with you and just seeing you come at this with poise, and also a sense of grit and determination. So, really, I do appreciate what I've learned from you as well. So, thanks for making time.
Yeah, my sincere pleasure. Thanks, Vince.
Okay.